suppose financial planning and financial advice are quite different. Financial planning is the next step, which is the holistic view of looking at everything in a person's finances. So that encompasses budgeting, income and expenses. It looks at assets and liabilities. It looks at every area of someone's finances and putting together a plan.
How did Hoxton and you come together, and what's the relationship? I think you are the only Hoxton representative in France.
Yeah, I live in France. Some of the other colleagues of mine that advise clients in France live in the UK or live in Dubai. I live in France, so in a way it's easier for me. I understand a bit more about French life, French culture. If you're thinking of moving, do it. Take the plunge and enjoy it. We don't regret it at all, but use an expert, use a legal expert, use financial planning experts.
Yeah.
People are there with specialist knowledge to help, and take advantage of it.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Mike, who is from Hoxton Wealth, a financial planning company, and we're going to learn everything there is to know about planning before coming to France and when you get here. Hi Mike, thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to being very well educated now about financial planning. So can you tell us a bit about what a financial planner does, what you specifically do?
Yeah, so I suppose financial planning and financial advice are quite different. Financial advice is traditionally what people would recognise as someone talking to them about a pension or an investment or a product. Financial planning is the next step, which is the holistic view of looking at everything in a person's finances. So that encompasses budgeting, income and expenses. It looks at assets and liabilities. It looks at every area of someone's finances and putting together a plan, hence the name financial planning.
So planning implies starting something before an event. So when is it ideal for people to talk to you? Is it actually, I'm sure you have a lot of clients, English-speaking clients here in France, who talk to you when they're already here. Is it beneficial for people to talk to you before they arrive?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, from a tax perspective, from a planning perspective, it can be beneficial to put things in place before you move. So there are certain areas of perhaps pension planning, which is quite crucial to do before you move to France. And I think the ideal scenario for a lot of my clients is to speak to them whilst they're in the UK or in the States or elsewhere before they move to France. We can do certain things before and then certain things after. So in an ideal world, it's before they move and then continuing that relationship once they're in France.
And I think you personally have worked in several countries around the world, haven't you?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. Actually, I've never worked in the UK as a financial planner. So despite all my qualifications here, I actually started in South Africa. So back in 2009, I moved to Cape Town, worked there for 3 years, then up to West Africa, to Ghana. 2 years in Ghana, which was fun. It was a real adventure.
Wow, Ghana.
Yeah, real Africa. And then back to Cape Town for another 7 years, and then we moved to France. So,
and what made you move to France? What was the core decision there?
Gosh, I think on our second date, my wife and I mentioned it to each other that perhaps one day we'd love to live in France.
Both of you wanted to. Both of you had that dream.
Both of us had the dream, and we put in place. It's a bit cheesy to say, but we put in place a 2020 vision, which was we'd like to move by 2020.
And what year are we talking that you met?
We met in 2009.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and then we moved back and then we got married and had our daughters. And we actually put a plan in place to move in the July 2020 to France. And then COVID hit. So of course in the Jan-Feb time, things started to change, and then in March we went into lockdown. And so in a way, COVID's been good and bad for me and my business and our family. Good in ways that I'll perhaps touch on in a sec about how the world of financial planning evolved. Bad, obviously, for the many ways. But for us, it accelerated our departure. We actually left in the May, sort of in the thick of COVID. We moved back to the UK for a few months. and then we moved to France. So it delayed us in a way, but it actually accelerated things. So yeah, we ended up moving to Toulouse in 2021.
And what sort of place where do you live in Toulouse? What sort of lifestyle have you chosen in France?
Very much the countryside. So if you ask my wife, I think she'll say she misses the vibe of the city life. But I think the French countryside's got a charm. It's very quiet and it's very peaceful and it's very green, and it's very, where we are, it's I think they describe it as the Tuscany of France. It's rolling hills and it's lakes, and it's beautiful. It's very different to Cape Town. Cape Town's a beautiful city, but South Africa has its problems, as many people know. So that was our main driving force, really, to leave and perhaps look at where's a better life for us and our kids, and that's why we settled on France.
Are chickens involved?
They are, yes.
How many?
Well, sad times at the moment. We've actually lost a couple recently to an illness. But we started with 7 and we're now down to 2 at the moment. So
you need to restock.
We do. We rescued them from a farm. There's an organisation that rescues battery hens. So we went along, and I think initially we wanted 1 each. We ended up with 7. And sadly the neighbour's dog got one last year, and another one died, and then 2 recently have died.
Oh God.
So we're down to 2. So I think in the new year we're going to get some more Yuille's pools, as they're famously known now.
You should check your local déchetterie. So where I live in the Luberon, the local council, the déchetterie where you take your rubbish, large rubbish, was offering 2 chickens per household to anyone who wanted them.
Yeah.
You could also have a compost bin made of wood that you had to assemble yourself, but the chickens were immensely popular. I didn't get any. I thought with 3 cats, 2 chickens might be just too much, but I think for you that could be the ideal solution.
Definitely, yeah.
So this feels like a good moment to talk about Hoxton. How did Hoxton and you come together, and what's the relationship? I think you are the only Hoxton representative in France.
Yeah, I live in France. Some of the other colleagues of mine that advise clients in France live in the UK or live in Dubai. I live in France, so in a way it's easier for me. I understand a bit more about French life, French culture. So I've been with Hoxton now 4 years nearly. It's flown by. I think when we moved back from South Africa to the UK, we were in Manchester for a few months, and Hoxton approached me and said, would you be interested in working with us? And I knew of Chris Ball, who set up the company. So I had a chat with Chris, and then a chat with Matt, who runs the UK. And and I mentioned to them, I said, I'll be moving to France in, I think it was the May we left. And we actually drove from Manchester to Toulouse. It took us 3 days, but it was great because we got to see a big part of France. We stayed over a couple of times. We had the girls in the back and we had the dog, so we had to stop every couple of hours. But it was great. It was an adventure to get to Toulouse. And and then since working with Hoxton now, I think things have really grown. The company's in a real growth phase now. We've acquired a couple of companies in the UK this year. We've recruited a lot of new advisors. The various licenses that we've got around the world are now really online. So Europe, our European license is based in Cyprus. And I think that's an important point to touch on, that Cyprus is very well regulated.
Okay.
Throughout Europe, you have what's called passporting. If you're regulated in a country, you can passport your advice to other members of the EU. And of course, with Brexit, that put a spanner in the works for a lot of advisors.
Yeah.
So previously, a lot of UK clients that had a UK advisor would move to France and continue that relationship.
And now that's not valid.
Yeah.
So because their qualifications aren't recognised in France or in Europe?
It's more in line with their license. So the UK license, they're not able to advise clients in France because of the compliance, the regulation, the PI cover, you name it. And Brexit put an end to passporting. So going to Cyprus and having a license in Cyprus, A, it's very well regulated.
Yeah.
B, it's English speaking, which
Yes.
helps for a lot of
Yeah.
our clients. And C, we can passport into any EU member state. So I do have clients in Spain and I do have clients in Germany and so on. But for me, the French side is primarily where I advise. The four main countries for me is the UK,
Yeah.
the US, France and South Africa.
And to do your job then, to be a financial planner, I mean, this is easy for you, I think, because you've lived in so many different parts of the world. It must really help to have had that experience of living in those countries. Just as you mentioned, being a financial planner in France with experience of living in France means you see things from a different perspective. You understand what people are going through. You're living it.
Yeah, we've been through it. And I think what's often overlooked is the language barrier.
Yeah.
Not overlooked, but perhaps people don't realise the significance of it. If your French isn't up to a certain standard, you can get by.
Yeah.
But it is tricky. You know, going to a bank, if you don't have help and support,
Yeah.
is tricky.
Yeah.
But if you work with partners, then it makes the process a lot easier. Same with financial planning.
Yeah.
If I gave a client some paperwork and it was in French and their French isn't up to scratch, then the terminology, perhaps some of the complexities around the financial products would be difficult.
And the trouble is that any mistake is likely to be costly, isn't it?
Can be, yeah.
So much better to be with somebody who understands both sides.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've been through it. You know, we moved to Ghana and we set up there, and that was tough. And we've done it in South Africa and we've done it in France. So, yeah, I think having that experience helps, certainly.
And do you think, you're a dad, you mentioned you have 2 girls. Do you think that having a family here in France relative to financial planning also gives you a bit of an edge? There must be different rules or considerations with a family than if you were just 2 adults travelling together.
Yeah, I think that's the same in any country. When you look at financial planning, the starting point is often protection.
Yeah.
You know, start at the beginning. What have you got and what do you need to protect? And work towards the goal, whatever that goal may be. But the protection side starts with the basics, a will. You know, what happens in the event of me dying? Okay. If you're of an age, life cover, critical illness cover, income protection, those types of products that serve a purpose in protection. And that goes for South Africa and that goes for the US and it goes for any country really. Is the protection element is the starting point. The financial plan builds from that to the goal, which is at the end, in a way. If it's retirement, if it's a round the world trip, if it's retiring at 40 or 50 or 70, the planning generally follows a theme.
Yeah.
And I think with children, quite often there's extra layers of planning that we need to do.
Yeah.
Just to put in place.
And particularly here in France, because inheritance laws are very different, aren't they, here in France, than definitely for the UK. I don't know that much about inheritance in America, but I do know that it's tough in France. So have you found that to be an important question for clients?
It is, yeah, it is. It's subtle differences, but there are differences. So people will often say, I'm going to set up a trust. Trusts don't work in France.
No.
And so that misconception coming from the UK with perhaps some prior knowledge of what may work in the UK doesn't always work in France.
Yeah.
Another one is pensions, where when you get to retirement age in the UK and you take your PCLS, your lump sum, which is tax-free in the UK, it's not tax-free in France. So subtle differences, but having the knowledge locally and understanding the French rules and regulations and tax implications, it's important. And again, working with partners. I'm not a tax practitioner, but I work with some fantastic people that are.
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, but I work with some fantastic lawyers. And I think having people around you that, you know, I often say a financial planner is a bit like a golf caddy. You're the one playing the shots. Right. You're the golfer. We're there at your side to bring in who we need to bring in to make everything work.
Yeah. That's a really nice way of putting it, and I think that's very much the fundamentals on which French Connections HCB is building these layers of partnership, of trusted partners,
exactly,
to be able to offer that full service and make sure everybody gets the best advice. And all partners working together. Yeah. Really important.
Specialist advice. We don't claim to be tax practitioners. We don't claim to be lawyers. We would work with specialists to come together and build a plan. And
have you had any particularly difficult or challenging, not that the clients themselves would be challenging, have you had to deal with circumstances which have been difficult to unravel or difficult to advise?
I think every client's different, of course, and every situation's different. And the part of the job I love the most is that initial contact, is finding out who, what, where, why, when, all those questions, understanding the client's situation, and then putting the plan in place, which can be very complex. Yeah. And it can be very straightforward.
Yes.
I think where a lot of people fear financial planning is, I'm American, we've got American products, we've got American rules and regulations and tax. How is that going to work in France? It's actually very straightforward.
But it's a legitimate question. I am one of those people.
Yeah.
I am really one of those people who would rather just bury something than the anticipation of not good news.
Yeah.
It actually freezes people, I think, in some regards.
It does. Head in the sand. Even simple things like moving money.
Yeah.
A lot of people think I'll just phone my bank and get them to move it, and that's fine. The costs involved can be horrendous. Bank-to-bank transfers. Again, it's not something we would recommend. Speak to a specialist forex trader who can get your money into France or wherever you may live and save you an awful lot of money in doing so.
Which is really relevant if people are buying property.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
In fact, I think one of the scenarios I speak of was a lady earlier this year moving from the States to France, and her bank had quoted her a rate, and the forex provider, I think they ended up saving her in the region of $25,000. It was a huge amount of money, and that saving alone paid for her entire move.
And that saving can buy a little house in France.
It could.
She could have had a second property free.
Yeah, and a few chickens.
And a few chickens, exactly. And getting back to you, what do you dream of for your girls growing up, who presumably go to the local school? Are they of school age?
They do, yeah. So they're 9 and 8 in the new year. So, yeah, they were 5 and 4 when we moved. Mm-hmm. They'd had a year in the French school in Cape Town,
right?
Which was great. It gave them the introduction to, I suppose, basic French.
Yeah.
But they're both fluent now. They've got all their best friends at school. And I suppose 8 hours a day for the last, coming up for 4 years, they're really ingrained in the French way of life, and they love it. They're very happy in the local school. We didn't want to put them in an expat or an international school, because we wanted them to get the real value of living where we live, which is the French countryside, the French way of life. Every time I pick them up in the afternoon, the first thing they say is, can we go to the boulangerie? They want to get a little snack or a croissant, or so it's really nice. It's a great lifestyle for them.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future they'll want to be closer to a town or a bigger city, possibly. But I think at the moment they go horse riding. It's about 600 metres from where we live. There's gymnastics, there's athletics, there's every sport that they want to do.
Yeah.
And they love it.
It's a dream life for kids, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think
mine are a bit older now, but France, the home is home.
Yeah.
And those childhood friends from the village school are still the best friends. So whenever they come home, it's the same crowd in our house that since they were born.
Yeah.
And don't you also think that in terms of vocabulary, as an English speaker originally, having learnt French no matter how many years ago, the language, the vocabulary you learn when you have children growing up in France is different.
Very much so.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
You learn, it gives you a whole other window into French life, for which I will forever be grateful. And I love it.
They're my translator
Yeah.
When we go out and perhaps I get stuck on a word or two and I look to them and they know it straight away. And I'm amazed actually at the depth of their vocabulary already.
Yeah.
They do spend a lot of time at school on, I think the two main subjects whenever I ask them is maths and French.
Yeah.
And so, they've really progressed an awful lot. We speak to them in English at home, and they do a lot of reading at home in English, English books. But at school, French all day, every day. They're growing so quickly, and their minds are moving so fast that it's amazing to watch them.
With mine, when they were little, because all of life, except for in our house, was in French, I used to, whenever we drove anywhere, I used to make them say this, that, those, these, there, so they could.
Yeah.
So they actually could, if ever they wanted or needed to speak English properly, would have that facility, because I could see it was disappearing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, it meant that a lot of their friends can also pronounce English words.
Yeah. Well, my wife has just started at the school that they're at doing English lessons with them.
Oh, great.
So I think they had, I forget what the day was, and they asked if she would go in and help. And she did a little 20-minute lesson in English. And there's 7 classes at the school, and all 7 teachers asked if she would go back.
Oh, fantastic.
So she's now a part-time English teacher in the local school, and she's loving it. And I think they love it. And it's nice. Being bilingual, I think, is a gift.
It is a gift.
It's not something we really experience in the UK. We're so reliant on English because the world speaks English that I think when you have that second language, my wife speaks Afrikaans from South Africa, and so I'm the odd one out, really.
Come on, get with it.
Exactly, one day.
And if you had some advice in general to give to the people who are watching this podcast, who are thinking of moving to France or are already here and have buried their head in the sand, what would you say to them?
Reach out, have a chat. We don't bite. We're here to help. I think Hoxton are a great company. We're licensed in the UK, so we can give advice to people who are in the UK at the moment, moving to France, same in America, moving to France. Do it, take that plunge, move to France, experience everything France has got to offer. There's some beautiful parts to the country. There's some lovely things that I think perhaps the UK has moved away from that are still prevalent in France. Everything's closed on a Sunday. How nice is it?
Yes, true.
Not to go to the shops on a Sunday.
Just to go to a market.
Yeah, it's lovely. Things like that you perhaps, I think when I was growing up as a kid, not many things were open on a Sunday. In France, nothing, which is lovely. So if you're thinking of moving, do it. Take the plunge and enjoy it. We don't regret it at all. Parts of it are tough, like anything, I suppose. But take the plunge and do it. But reach out and speak to people who are experts in their field. Don't try and, if you can do your taxes yourself, by all means, but use an expert. Use a legal expert. Use financial planning experts. People are there with specialist knowledge to help, and take advantage of it.
Thank you so much, Mike, for filling us in on all things financial planning. It's been great to talk to you, and now I'm feeling like I need to book an appointment. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Please follow us on our socials. Pick up our podcast from wherever you look at your podcasts. You can always head to our YouTube channel or just check us out on the website www.frenchconnectionshcb.com. Thank you, and see you next time.